Hello, Wayne.
Hey, I can see you now.
Yes, see you and hear you. All good. How's it going?
Not bad. All good. How are you?
Not bad. Yeah, all right. All right. At home, like everyone else, I assume.
Yeah. Well, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Don't go out, people. Don't go to the supermarket. Don't go to the market on the Friday. Don't go to the picnic at the park. Right. It's great to spend the next half hour with you. Very happy that we've got a bunch of people on the line as well with us. Um, I wanted to take that opportunity to have a bit of a chat with you, mate, and yeah, go through a few of the things. Well, first off, ask how you're doing. How is the programmatic advisory? How you've coped with the current situation? How you've adapted?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm now in the UK, so not what I originally had planned.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, I moved out to New York in January to open our office there, and it turns out opening an office during a global pandemic is pretty challenging. So decided to come back for the foreseeable future, however long this thing might last. And then see what we can do from here. I mean, the reality is a lot of what we can do remotely in terms of the delivery. It's just obviously the industry that we're in is being impacted. Um, sort of spend is being pulled by some advertisers that has a knock-on effect into the service providers and a knock-on effect into consultancies. So lots of our new business work has kind of slowed down, I'd say. We do have
How do
some.
you how do you do new business? Do you rely on face to face a lot, like events and things like that, or can you mostly reach out to people on LinkedIn and just get? Because you probably have a lot of inbounds as well. Like, has that changed? Has you seen that slow down?
Yeah, I mean, most of our new business comes to us through referral or through word of mouth. We do some outreach, but it's a bit hit and miss, to be honest. There's no real. Um, we've never really landed anything major through LinkedIn outreach. It's mainly been through our own marketing efforts. So we've had, some conversations still ongoing, some inbound leads, but generally it's slowed down a bit. And we had some, our pipeline was pretty buoyant. We had some good opportunities in the US and the UK, but they've been put on hold for obvious reasons. But we're quite fortunate in that we do have clients who are retained. So it's not all too not doom and gloom, too doom and gloom.
Okay.
So
And you've done some really exciting things as well. I received an email, was it yesterday or the day before, trying to package the offer to make it like more work from home compliant, I guess. Can you
yeah,
tell me
yeah.
a bit more about that?
I mean, generally when people think about how they work with us, the engagement is we go in, meet them, understand their needs, go away, come back with a proposal, go through a bunch of sign off. That sort of sales process takes a bit of time and quite a lot of commitment. So the start of this week, we launched some products. So if you go to the programmaticadvisory.com/products, you'll see that we've created like pre-built packages of things we can deliver. So they range from brand safety review, campaign review, overflow support, sponsored content, monetization reviews, like a bunch of things that we can help businesses just keep progressing because um, the industry can't just stop and stand still. You still have to keep moving forward. It's just being done in a totally different way because of what's happening in the world.
What do you hear from brands? Did they pause spend? Did they pause campaign? Did they change the message? What's the attitude right now? Do they know? Have they done anything yet?
It's a bit dependent by vertical. Some of those verticals, like travel, are being really impacted, and it's probably a bit insensitive to keep spending significant sums of money in marketing when you're near bailout territory.
Yeah.
Where others, they just continue as is because they're less impacted. So I'd say some of the verticals like auto, travel, retail, um, they are tending to slow down not necessarily pause. I wouldn't say pause. They still maintain search and social and some programmatic.
What's
Um,
what's the time frame? Do they pause like straight away, or do they pause next month, next quarter? What's the
it's
what do
pretty
you see?
tends to be pretty quickly. When they do decide to pause, it's quite an immediate decision. I imagine some brands are in just reviewing it as they go. some of them probably a bit unsure on what the impact might be to their business. But when they do decide to pause it, it's pretty immediate. And then some others, as I mentioned, just sort of strip away some of the non-essential, I guess, advertising. So it's a little bit case by case, but I think generally from all the studies that I'm reading, there's a lot more advertisers who are pausing and stopping spend, and that's not being replaced by the increase in spend from others. So that's definitely a short-term thing, and how long that goes on for, it's obviously uncertain at this point.
Yeah, got an interesting comment from Tom, who says that McDonald's have pulled all spend in the UK, but have done loads of viral marketing. So there's probably, I mean, the message has to be different, where you don't talk to clients in the same way now than you would have like 2 or 3 weeks ago. You have to adapt the content of the message. You have to adapt the way you address. But I kind of think that, I mean, I've seen some communication from brands like, what was this? There was like a CEO of a I think maybe a hotel chain, or like someone related to the travel industry, who came out as being very like empathic and very much like concerned for consumers. And I don't think it was a spin, but like I think there's a way to kind of put together a different message and show social responsibility as a company, which is probably something that Marriott, thank you, Joanna, probably something that you can that can work in your favor in a way, if there's, you know, such a thing as kind of profiting from this. It's not profiting from the crisis, but it's like showing that you care, showing that you're part of that community. I've read something else about, I think it was McDonald's employee going to help a supermarket kind of delivery work, right? So because they're out of a job anyway, so like they're being placed as kind of staff to help supermarket delivery and things like that. I think there's a way as companies to communicate values to your clients in a slightly different way in this time.
Yeah, it's particularly those consumer-facing brands. You know, I saw Guinness did a really good ad for staying at home, where the head of a Guinness was a sofa, which was brilliant. But yeah, you don't want to be the one that gets it wrong, which would be, you know, you get the backlash from consumers. Like that's just.
I'm still waiting for that Corona campaign, mate. I'm telling you.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
Where's that?
Probably too soon.
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah. Okay. So we had a huge string of news and announcement and discussions about identity in the weeks and months leading to this situation. There's certainly a lot less news, although yesterday we had one of the regular WebKit announcements saying they're shutting even more of the doors that were still slightly open. We'll get back to that in a second. How's that discussion going? I mean, you've obviously, that's obviously a topic that you're talking with your clients on a regular basis. Is this less the case now? Is this something that is seen as kind of too much of a long-term thing, or do you still have identity-related discussions with brands right now? And how are they looking at this? If it's changed in the past few weeks?
Yeah, so for us at the start of this year, the two biggest conversations we were having with brands was in-housing, inverted commas, and identity. So, you know, ownership, and then what can you do with measurement and targeting in future? Every conversation involved one of those two, often both, when we're talking to brands. So that hasn't gone away. That still continues. Just probably the timeline, maybe, given that they've got challenges around budgets, etc., probably puts both of those a bit on hold. I would expect as soon as we go through the short-term stuff we're going through at the moment, those will pick back up because they are the key priorities. You know, and the thing is, it's not like they're, you know, we'll get onto this, I'm sure, but like hard to solve both of those.
Tell me about it.
I mean, in housing, it just isn't easy at scale, and then identity is like, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty. Like as we just said, the announcement from WebKit this week, that changes the game for a couple of providers and markets. You've got, you know, everyone's trying to do different but similar things to solve for the challenges. And I think, you know, my personal opinion on where this lands, I'm not sure what you think, Matt, but like, it probably won't just be something which replaces the cookie directly. Like we've all used the cookie for years. Different companies use it different ways. It won't be a replacement. Every companies will do different things with consumer data, and that'll be in different forms, whether it's hashed email addresses, whether it's aggregated data, whether it's consented first party, whatever it might be. So for brands at the moment, I think where they're at is just trying to get their head around what those routes may be, and then also what does it mean for them, because they have marketing budgets they need to start thinking about. If their financial year starts in July, they have to think about how the measurement's impacted. And what they don't want to do is just turn off digital advertising, because they know that's where consumer eyeballs are going. So they're in a difficult spot, I think.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the planning is particularly difficult. I think from a brand standpoint, it's probably. I mean, we're seeing this a lot more from a publisher standpoint. Most of our discussions are with publishers and ad tech, but very much publishers in the first place. And for publishers, it's an existential threat, right? Like if there's no advertising revenue in most cases, right, because it's the exception of a handful of publishing brands who've been able to kind of build enough of a subscriber base that they could potentially survive a drop of 50 to 80% of their advertising revenue. Everyone else has a very strong dependency on advertising revenue, and advertising revenue today is tied to the ability to use data. You can regret it. You can say it was better 20 years ago. That's just that's the state of the market today. And the ability to use data is related to ability to identify a user. And so that's a very, very challenging situation for most publishers, brands as well. But I think brands, when you look at it from like the high level perspective, there's so many ways for them to engage with their consumers. Digital advertising being one of them. Within digital advertising, Facebook and Google being like the chunk, and then the rest of the world. So it feels, I think there's a bit of a. It's very important to advertise on the open web and to advertise across the various premium publishers and those properties, etc., etc. But if it doesn't work because you can't measure, because you can't target, because you can't frequency cap anymore, then you can probably find other ways to do this. I think for publishers, it's very difficult to find other ways to do this, right?
Yeah, I'd agree. And the people, you see some commentators say, well, just stick a single sign-on around all the publishers. But it's like, why would a user want to sign in to certain publishers? What's the point? And you got to
and even if that's a relevant discussion, and I think that's, I mean, you see a lot of people saying, we need users to log in, right? We need users to log in so that we have, we solve every problem. Like all of a sudden, the login is the panacea, right? It's the cure to all of our problems. But like, it's not something you can just turn on like this. There has to be a reflection about what is the product. How do you encourage users to log in for something they've not had to log in for years? Like, how do you change their behavior? How do you incentivize logins? How do you structure your offerings differently so that you have something better when you log in than when you don't log in? And potentially there's other layers, right? If you consent, if you register, if you consent to receiving targeted advertising, if you consent to us using your email address or to tell us who you are and what you do and what you like in life, then maybe you got, like, I think this tiering process hasn't been done yet by publisher, and it's not something they can do in 12 months. It's not just an advertising thing. It's a proper product strategy that has to be redesigned.
Yeah, totally agree. And then on the buy side, the alternatives that people talk about is like contextual targeting. It's kind of like, good luck with that, to be honest, because it's like that's always made up campaign strategies. You usually would have some form of contextual, whether it's through segment based or like direct with like private marketplace deals, whatever it might be. But that's not going to be significant enough to replace performance advertising and how you measure that. So the people that say, well, advertising worked 20 years ago, it'll work again and keep working. It's like, well, I think brands have become accustomed to doing things in certain ways, and the businesses doing it in certain ways, and measuring, I think, is the main thing. If those ways,
I think 20 years ago you didn't have the alternatives that you have today in the form of Google and Facebook, right? it's almost weird to call them alternatives. Like, if you can't measure, if you can't target, if you can't cap across the open advertising ecosystem, then just more money is going to go to them, because you can still do that over there. Like 20 years ago, there wasn't an option, right? Now there is an option, and so what's going to happen in the investment decisions? I think that's a real concern, and that's a fair concern.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah, and then the net impact on publishers is being at the mercy of a handful of people that help them monetize is it could be extremely difficult, and particularly as oftentimes they're competitive in some areas. So if you're a big video content producer and the only way you can monetize is through Google, well, they own YouTube, and like similar to Facebook going into sports rights and live, and it's definitely difficult. It's definitely difficult, and I think sometimes it's a bit overlooked from brands on the buy side, because they can still market to consumers through Facebook and Google and still achieve their campaign goals. Maybe that gets impacted, and it's only like a segment of their total reach, but you can get a bit forgetting of what's available elsewhere.
It's interesting, because you talk a lot about measurement, and in the in the wider ecosystem, usually cookies are related to targeting a lot more than measurement, right? And I'm interested in this because I think we have a very siloed view of what brands are interested in, and we look at this. There's like three things that you can do, right? That you need identifiers to be able to do at scale and in a precise fashion. Targeting, like understanding who your consumers are and targeting them, not them individually, but like groups of users, right? Segmenting them and targeting them with a relevant message. That's one. Two is frequency capping, be able to deliver your campaigns, in a meaningful fashion, right? And three is measurement, attribution, right? Whether it's post click, post view, et cetera, for which you need to be able to connect an event with a kind of a marketing interaction. How would you rank them from an advertiser standpoint? Why do you think is top of mind?
Probably measurement, targeting, frequency capping. Well, that's a bit. It depends on the brand. Some brands have very loose measurement frameworks, to be honest, and are less reliant on the one-to-one methods that you have today. For example, they might be more focused on uplift studies, which are less reliant, which obviously aren't reliant on cookies. Whereas other brands, they put a lot of money into the ecosystem and expect to know what every ad impression, what that leads to.
Is it like a brand kind of data savviness differentiation, or is it a performance versus branding campaign, just simply?
More performance versus branding. There's some super sophisticated advertisers, but who measure in non-cookie based ways, and they're data savvy, but they just don't sell online, or the goal of marketing digitally isn't based on sales. It's more brand related. So they look at things like uplift and A/B testing and behavioral change, as opposed to this person saw an ad at 3:23 p.m. on The Guardian, and then they went to YouTube and then they did XYZ. So it's a bit dependent on those, and the ones which if you think about Google and Facebook as performance vehicles, which service lots of advertisers, it's a big reason why digital media has grown the way it has. It hasn't been based off the back of brand spend. It's been based on the back of it's been working to drive sales or drive anything online. So if that's removed and you can't measure that investment return, I think that just becomes exceptionally difficult to maintain that investment into industry, which therefore creates content, publishers, service layers, jobs, etc., etc.
Yeah. So on this, like there's a bunch of solutions, right, that have been kind of making their way into the market around. Let's say, let's call them the privacy sandbox approach, right? Where you're not supposed to deal with individual user level data anymore, but for privacy reason or for whatever reason, you have access to cohorts or groups of users who have similar behavior. Do you think this is? I mean, where I stand, right? we're firmly on the opposite side, right? Trying to maintain an individual user identifier. What's your point of view, and what do you think? How do you think brands are approaching this Is the future a kind of a fuzzy math type of approach, or do we need individual user IDs?
If you were to, ideal world state would say you would not do cohort analysis. Ideally, you'd be able to match one-to-one customer journeys and how they interact with your advertising and properties. Whether or not GDPR in particular impacts that ability at scale, so outside of just consented users, and also what the browsers are doing, that I think then leads into what everyone's discussing around federated learning and cohort analysis. Do I think that's optimal for the way that marketing should be measured and targeted? No, I mean, absolutely not. But it might be the only thing you can do in future. And I know, Matt, you obviously own a business which is trying to solve for this, but there's a lot of uncertainty around how that plays out. And I think we'd all not want to. That's the extreme privacy approach, which some people are really backing. But whether or not we get to that is, massively up for debate. It's easy to say yes because it's in theory, the most privacy compliant. I would like to see some companies being inspected for that.
Yeah, because in the end, I mean, it's privacy compliant because but someone still has access to the I mean, the user level data is still available somewhere, right? And then it's only distributed in aggregated fashion in a packaged, in a segmented fashion, but it's still available somewhere.
Yeah, and there's still some form of matching of sorts, whether it's based off multiple things, so you can't track back to an individual. But I think some of the ICO and Keneal would look at that and probably still have some question marks. But lots of these solutions are super early. Lots of very data sensitive companies are very uncertain in working with them at the moment. But if that's where we get to, that is where we get to. Just I would say that isn't optimal from a pure marketing strategy and getting it done perspective.
Especially since on the other side, when you look at Google and Facebook, their ability to do one-to-one at scale is not going to be limited anyway, right? Because they're hiding behind the consent that they get from users to access their services in exchange for basically give away the entire life.
Yeah, I mean, that's raised another thing, is that the way that we've thought about getting consent has been pretty abysmal collectively across the industry. Like the mechanisms and user experience to gain or not give consent is terrible. Even me, as I'd like to think a relatively sophisticated internet user, you sort of browse through your mobile pages and very unclear on some of the terminology around what companies are doing, and everyone's got a different approach. And I feel like people have just forgotten the importance of consent, where actually you can probably optimize some of your content and strategies around improving that would have significant gains for you in the short term.
It feels like we haven't built this into the value proposition. There's a value exchange, right? Like you get access to free services, free content, high quality content as well. You have to give something in return. If you're not ready to pay, you have to give something. Your attention, your some of your data, some of your behavior, right? That's the trade-off. And I think most consumers understand this, but I don't think we've clearly enough explained the trade-off. I don't think we've gone through the whole packaging of the user experience process so that trade-off is explicit and it's clear. And there's always a bit of we don't want to bother our users with this, so let's just make it like easy and simple to say yes. It's not really explaining the trade-off. And at some point, I mean, users have to take the responsibility, but publishers also have to take the responsibility, I guess. And to have this relationship, if you want to have access to, you go to the restaurant, you cannot have the same menu if you want to pay £10 or £50. It's same for content, and I think we've tried to overlay, the consent management layer on top of something that didn't change, and let's try to get it out of the way as quickly as we can. I don't think that was the spirit of the law in the first place. Certainly not. But I don't think that's what we're looking at, like going forward, if we want to make this a sustainable trade-off.
Yeah, and I think just reading Tom's comment about how consumers just don't understand how their data is used. They don't. If they really wanted to look into it, they could. It would take hours to figure it out. So I think rather than running an ad campaign to talk about how great advertising is, just making the consumer experience for consent way more, humanized and easy to understand, I think would be beneficial. But at the moment, all the major companies have a different set of lawyers who interpret regulation in different ways, and then they have terminology, and it's all a bit different. And I don't think that helps us. It definitely doesn't help the consumer.
Yeah, but there's still a question though whether the consumer cares or not. Like cares enough to to go through the process of understanding and digging into what you're doing with my data and everything like this. And because I mean, data-driven marketing isn't new, right? It's been happening for decades, before programmatic, before digital advertising, direct marketing, telco data, registration plates, being used for direct marketing approaches. I mean, is there a real concern? Do they not understand the trade-off at all, or do they understand that they're fine with it and they just want to get on with their lives? I don't think we've had that discussion with yeah. Lisa says the consumer would care if nothing was free. That's my point, right? Like right now they're getting everything for free. They understand there's a trade-off somewhere. Do we want to make that trade-off clearer? Probably, because then they will really understand the value of free. And most would probably be happy with it. I mean, I'm sure there was a calculation from Ari Lewin from Triple Lift a few weeks ago around the value of the services we access, which was roughly calculated by the advertising revenue they're making. It was like several $1,000s a year, or like close to $2,000 a year, I think. I'm pretty sure 99% of the population, or 95% of the population, if you take Johnny Ryan out, would be happy not to have to pay $1,500 or $2,000 a year, and to give some of their attention, some of their behavioral data, keeping in mind that we're not dealing with like credit card numbers and kind of social security numbers, or I mean, I think we just need to have that discussion, right?
Yeah, I think the reason why the regulation was brought in is because it's to protect humans and consumers. So consumers may or may not care, but they expect there to be a level of where there's regulation that it's expected they're not being harmed by having data misused. So I think there's as an industry, and all the publishers that monetize through data and advertisers that use it has to be understanding of what consumer data is and how important it is. But I think this is.
I think that's very true, and that's also echoing one of the comments we're having right now, right? Yes, we have to take consent seriously, and we should have taken consent more seriously for a long time. And a lot of ad tech companies have actually taken consent seriously for a long time, but not everyone has. And so, being able to rebuild the industry on a basis that takes consumer preferences into account a lot more than we've done in the past, I think is a very good thing. You just don't want to throw the baby with the bathwater, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Right, we're almost up the end of our time. We're actually past the end of our time. What's next? And I mean, is this a 3 months delay? Is this a 6 months delay? When do you think we'll be back to a point where we can have those fascinating identity discussions on very controversial panels together in a room? What's your what you're planning for? I mean, you're an entrepreneur. You're a business owner, right? What's your contingency plan? You're preparing for 3 months at home, 6 months, 12 months. What's the outlook according to you?
We're preparing 3 months at home is how we're sort of set up. It's kind of a lot of the guidelines in the US and UK is 12 weeks from the start of last week. And we actually started working from home prior to being enforced, because it's just a sensible thing to do. In terms of business disruption, I expect conversations to pick back up in the week after next. I think once people are a bit more familiar with how you do work from home, which surprises me, but lots of people are still unfamiliar with that, and that actually the world is moving on just in a different way. I think people will start to pick up some of those projects that they put on hold. So that's the way we're thinking about it. It's kind of a 3 month disruption, pending whatever may happen every day with all the updates. But the reality is, I think some of the projects and thinking that we've been working on will start to pick back up in a couple of weeks.
All right. Looking forward to that. Thank you for your time. It's been great to chat to you. Thank you everyone who tuned in. There will be another one of that with someone with less beard than Mr. Blodwell, or maybe not. We don't know, right? With barbers being shut down right now, anything can happen. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Wayne, for your time. Great speaking with you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Cheers, man.